Hello team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. Another one. I am consistently staring at a webcam and ranting about the world because the world keeps happening and it just doesn't stop. Now, not that I want the world to stop, I just want idiots in the world to stop. Just stop it. Putin, stop it. Trump and your lackeys, stop appeasing Putin. Everyone just calm down and give people their land back that you've stolen. Please, can we do that? Okay, no, it's not happening. Oh, right, I have to report on this. So, with that in mind, I have the wonderful Brendan Kelley on, who you guys will know, hopefully, if you watch previous lives, that he has been working with Tochny, who are a great bunch of people operating in the context of collecting data, analyzing the data, presenting the data, doing lots of synthesis, etc., etc. He's also done a little bit of writing for Euromide and Press over the last few months. He's now concentrating, I think, on his Substack, on what's going on in Kherson, particularly carving out a little niche for himself in the kind of all these different areas of the war that we're all reporting on. He's going to talk to that. I'll let him introduce himself more formally. Just to let you know how this conversation is going to go today is we're going to actually start off in rant mode, probably, knowing me, talking about what's going on with the peace plan in the US, in Europe, in Saudi Arabia, talking about a few things to do with that. And then that might be a segue into talk about US aid, USAID, that Brendan has some good knowledge of. He's just written a piece on that. And then we're going to probably talk about data from Kherson, drone activity, and the work that he's carved himself this niche out concerning. So anyway, long introduction. Brendan, thanks so much for coming on, mate. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yep. Thank you for having me again, Jonathan. So I'm a freelance journalist right now, but associate member primarily with Tochny, and also I'm the daily news mapper for Andrew in his basement and for his map, the Ukraine Daily Update map. So I do basically the news mapping. I don't do geolocations like the serious guys do. I do more or less kind of like we think it happened here, or I'll scrape geolocations from the geo-confirmed guys and then geolocate news events. So you can find those news events in the it's actually a layer on the map. It's events database up in the corner there.
Yep, events DB. There it is.
Yep.
So we turn that on.
The map will just turn all kinds of well, I haven't done today yet, so if you go to the 15th, it'll turn all kinds of red and blue.
Yeah, so that's only the events database that's been that has come up there, I think. So that should, oh no, yeah, that's right. So that should be all the stuff that you've geolocated and concerned yourself with. Is that correct?
No,
there's quite a lot of drone stuff on there.
No, they should have a white ring around them. Those are actual geolocations. That's Gick and the boys.
Interesting. Okay, well, some kind of events on there. I don't know why that's not quite coming up, because events database. Anyway,
is that on the 14th or 15th?
That's on the 16th. That's probably why.
I haven't done today yet. I haven't done.
There we go. So there we go. Sorry, you're absolutely right. So all of these white
behind in Ukraine.
Yeah. So all of these white ones here, that's what he's saying. Wow, that's an awful lot. So these are events that are reported on in the news. Then you scrape the news and you find out, where that's happened, what's happened, and then when you click on these, you'll get an idea of what took place there, and sometimes some details about that from maybe a news piece. Here, children died under ice. 3 children fell through the ice and drowned in that area. Rescuers recovered the bodies of 9-year-old, etc., etc. So that sounds terrible. Goodness me! At a time when children are more valuable than ever, to lose them falling through ice, my goodness, that's heartbreaking. But what a horrible one! I suppose most of these are horrible things happening.
There were actually 2 of those yesterday, or 2 days ago. Sorry.
Yeah. Just they're terrible. There's another one. Oh no, that's a different one. So anyway, so that's what you do with regard to the mapping for Andrew. Really important stuff to give you guys an overall sense of what's going on, and not just in terms of like shells hit this field, a drone blew up that vehicle, but it's like really recounting everything that's taking place concerning the war in a meaningful way, geolocating, chronolocating as well, getting it in a timeline sorted out too. So that's really, really valuable.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that you see the value in it, because it is, those aren't the things that necessarily get a lot of the media coverage, right? Like, you'll see like on Twitter or Blue Sky, the geolocations, the hits on vehicles, right? The hits on personnel. That's what gets a lot of the views, and so like a lot of locations kind of get overlooked in terms of like what's going on there. So like you might not hear about anything that goes on in Chernihiv Oblast, but there is shelling every week that goes on in Chernihiv on the border between Chernihiv and Bryansk. So it's important to recognize that. So I think that's what makes this important, and it also kind of gives you a history of the war day by day, which I'm attracted to that kind of aspect of it as a former history teacher myself.
Yeah, fascinating. So really important work there. And yeah, you now do an awful lot of work also on your own Substack. Talk us through a little bit before. I mean, we'll look at this in more detail later, but just tell us what your Substack's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. So my Substack started off as a place for me to sort of get my feet into journalism. A few months back, a year back, I had more stuff on there that I've since deleted, where I was kind of practicing writing in journalism again, related to Ukraine. And so that's sort of how I started out, got involved with Tochny. Then it became more of like investigative journalism that I was doing and aligning just those articles with what I was posting on Tochny. So you'll see further back, some of my Tochny articles are on here because I would post them here, go through it with Tochny members, and then post them to Tochny after doing kind of like a reformatting or a review. And then as I got more involved into journalism and starting working with Euromaidan Press, that's when I started doing stories of genocide. It started out as a thread I was doing in September and October on X originally, but it became just like logistically really difficult to be, number one, accurate, and I really wanted to get all the details. So what I was doing there is just going through all the civilian casualty reports that I could potentially find, all non-combatant casualty reports that I could find, and trying to organize them by time, date, location. And that was honestly, it was kind of a foolhardy move on my part, because Russian terror is just too much to track and categorize, and to do it with the detail that I wanted to do it with images and videos of all the events, to make sure that I could actually present, I would have like 100 and 150 sources per weekly thread, per weekly article. It just became too much and I couldn't do it myself. So I decided it's best to focus more on Kherson. So I've since stopped doing the stories of genocide, because I think actually Tim White does a really good job at the day-to-day tracking of civilian casualties through his daily threads. I think it's probably the most accurate thing you'll find out there in the media on a day-to-day
Interesting.
basis.
Oh, that's good news, because I've interviewed Tim a number of times, and we're in close contact quite often. So that's good that you'd say that.
Yeah, I think I would defer, like, people that are really interested in like the stories of genocide aspect of my Substack. If you want to keep up with that, follow Tim White for future updates. But Kherson is where I'm going to focus myself for the time being. I think is where I would really like to keep my focus, because I can do it with a level of detail that you're not going to get anywhere else. Even though it is really kind of a small geographical area that I'm focusing on there, I do think it's really important.
Have you ever been contacted by people from Kherson that are interested in what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I have some contacts with some people that live both in Kherson city itself, but I have a really good contact with someone who they're actually an internally displaced person now because of this.
Right.
But they were living in a village south of Kherson along the
Right.
Dnipro River, and they were enduring daily drone swarms. It was kind of a situation where you'd have the artillery spotting drones like your Mavic 3 drones kind of spotting and dropping skids, and then you'd have FPVs fly in and pick off targets that were being spotted by the drone above, or other targets that were previously designated by like reconnaissance drones. So like if you're familiar with Artem's work at Tochny, the FPV interceptions of Russian recon drones, that's a really, really big component of the combat that goes on in Kherson because of the artillery situation and how artillery and drones work together in Kherson. I think people that are interested in Kherson should also be looking at those FPV interceptions, because I think that's one way that you can really disrupt the Russians' operations in this
really
area.
interesting.
Eyes away.
Yeah, because I was going to speak to you later about, what are the Ukrainians doing in trying to fight these almost unfightable waves of drones that are attacking civilian infrastructure and civilians, full stop. Right. So we're going to go left field now, and then we'll return to that, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
We're going to start topically in terms of geopolitics, international geopolitics, and that's mainly because I want to rant. I haven't had my daily rant yet, and I know that you're pretty upset about the state of affairs. So let's just run through a bunch of things. I'm going to just splurge the audience with a number of just disparate points to get a sense of what's going on. And of course, the context of this is the Trump administration has been fairly chaotic. They've said a number of different things through a number of different people. Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, Keith Kellogg, the Special Envoy, Mike Walls, the National Security Advisor, and then Trump himself, and then Vice President J.D. Vance. All of these people have said oftentimes contradictory things about what's going on. Then you've had a bilateral peace negotiation being planned for Saudi Arabia between the US and Russia. Then it appears to me that Zelensky heard about this and then has kind of muscled himself in on it, because like he's very clearly said, look, if you guys are going to start making decisions about us without us, about us without us, very, very iconic statement there, then we're not going to adhere to that. So we need to be a part of that. And actually Europe needs to be a part of that. So then you've had a reaction from Europe getting together today. I think it is. Macron has convened a meeting. You've had yesterday Keir Starmer say, right, we're going to send, the UK is going to be committed to sending peacekeeping troops. Of course, you can argue about whether Europe's remotely got enough peacekeeping troops for 1,000+ kilometers of front line, etc., etc. But that was a really strong thing, at least to start with. And Europe's going to meet. There's possibility of $300 billion of frozen Russian assets, that being the key leverage that Europe has that the US doesn't have. And you could get, if today you get a decision that $300 billion is going to be released by Ukraine, that's almost like the US doesn't matter anymore, in my opinion. That would absolutely smash the US out of the water and say, right, they're going to have $300 billion. They can buy stuff off the US, but essentially we also want to upscale within Europe. And you could get Europe taking over responsibility for Ukraine, and there would be not a lot the US could do about it. Their leverage would then remain in sanctions. Okay, so that's the context for everyone. Sorry, Brendan, that's a lot of me talking. Let's now do a bunch of things that have turned up this morning that make me pretty angry. First of all, and this is just Russian media saying this, but apparently McDonald's, Coca-Cola, Visa, MasterCard, PepsiCo, and Apple will return to Russia. So, morality doesn't really matter. It's all about making money. And I think that's what we're learning from the Trump administration. It's about extracting as much value out of Russia and Ukraine as possible without any recourse to morality or politics. Then we hear that some European officials are eyeing Russian gas with greed. Lower energy bills could revive moribund industry and reassure households. As talk of an imminent end to the war in Ukraine intensifies, Europe is already eyeing a resumption of large-scale purchases of Russian gas. So that's depressing. Then you've got Lukashenko meeting with, he's the Belarusian dictator, meeting with CIA agents. We hear that the US is becoming softer on Belarus, and this is arguably because they're going to put tariffs on Canada, and if Canada retaliate with tariffs on and there are tariffs on potash coming down into the US from Canada, if the Americans put a tariff on potash imports or exports, they need to get potash and fertilizer, and that's a real problem for the US. So they've now released potash tariff sanctions on Belarus. So the US is using Russia and Belarus in this case, and Ukraine as just ways of gaining advantage within the world. So we're going to tariff Canada, and we're going to mitigate the impact of tariffs by lifting sanctions on Belarus, irrespective of what moral geopolitical impact that has in a wider scheme of things. Shashant Joshi says, don't think it's out of the question, but right now Putin demands his demands include no foreign troops in Ukraine. So either Trump coerces Putin to change that position, which requires effort, or there's no deal, which is an eminently plausible and currently underpriced outcome, or Trump folds. So there's lots of discussion about the troops and peacekeeping troops, etc., etc. We then have Mike Lee, who's a senator from the US. I think he's Ohio, is he? I don't know, but he is not a good human being. Says time to leave NATO. So this idea that you've got GOP senators wanting the US out of NATO. As Angry Staffer says, these absolute morons are going to destroy the US. If you're in favor of the US leaving NATO, you either don't want the US to succeed, or you don't know what the F NATO does. Worth noting that Mike Lee voted to expand NATO in 2022. How times change. We've got in the UK the reaction from the MAGA equivalent party in the UK, Reform, to Starmer giving troops to Ukraine, is them just going mental about that. We can't even protect our own borders, and Starmer's aiming to put British troops on the ground in Ukraine. Warmongering politicians have got far too many British sons and daughters killed for no reason. Our hollowed out armed forces deserve so much better. So they're going down the MAGA route as well. You've got the UK leader of the Conservative Party, the opposition leader, parroting JD Vance's Munich security speech, going down a populist thing. So now there looks like there's division in UK politics. You've got Alice Weidel in Germany last night in a debate, saying that she will prevent tourists from being sent and is pro-Russia. She's also met in secret with the Chinese ambassador Wu Keng for years, and not at the Chinese embassy, but at her own house. You've got Congress people in the US being so cultish that they want to make President Trump's birthday a federal holiday. It's just really disgusting. You've got Marjorie Taylor Greene basically being mental, and also being in charge of Doge, the committee overseeing Doge. She's bought a load of shares in Tesla, and Tesla is a company owned by the person doing Doge. So it's just corruption. And then you've got Musk continues ripping apart any efforts globally to prevent Russian interference in elections. Moldova has, and you're going to talk about this soon. Sorry, there's so much here, but just a few more. Moldova's lost $22 million intended to support electoral processes after the election of Doge and Elon Musk, and they cut USAID funding. So that's then going to have an impact on Moldova's free elections, or they won't be free. And meanwhile, Doge has just posted classified US intelligence data on its website, and officials are scrambling. That was a few days ago, and yet people are silent on that. And yet they went mental over Hillary Clinton's emails. The double standards. You've got the US-Russian negotiations of Ukraine have not yet begun. After they start, Kiev and Europe will be included in them. So the idea that Europe and Ukraine will not be included. But he noted that for the negotiations, Marco Rubio, the countries must ensure the normal functioning of embassies. So the US is now pressuring Ukraine to open Russian embassies in Ukraine. That would be just a massive insult. And Lavrov is getting involved. So much more. Goodness me, I could go on. And then you are hearing the threat. Trump has privately threatened to pull all of US troops out of Europe, if Ukraine and NATO don't agree to their peace deal. Just absolutely insane. And all the while, Russian newspapers are reporting that, well, quote here, dumbfounded Europe, need by America just below the belt, is struggling to get its breath back. And the Russians are loving this. They're loving what America is doing, and this is how the German Der Spiegel newspaper sees it. So a table with a carving knife and a map of Ukraine, and Russia and the US are there ready to carve it up. It's pretty depressing. Jay and Kiev, the final thing I'll say, and then let you go for it. After Trump's now daily rounds of praise for Putin, berating Ukraine, sending his minions to promote pro-Russian parties in the EU and lobby for Musk's right to rip apart European society with Russian fascist disinformation, anyone on the right still thinking that positive reinforcement is going to change his mind, prompting a turn away from Putin and toward Ukraine is horribly naive, embarrassingly so. Only a rebellion within the GOP, with the Republican Party Congress, can save the US from a Russian-backed fascism, looting of the country, and a large-scale European war that Putin plans. America's future is Hungary, which has now been looted into the position of third poorest EU member. End of rant, or end of stimulus for you to cast your opinions over. What is your take on what is going on?
Okay. At the heart of it, foreign influence operation, I would say. Foreign infiltration of our government is what I would say. Whether that's, like, I was listening to you and Jonathan Fink go back and forth about this the other day. Like, is there a cohesive plan to this, or, and I think or is it just, Trump and the Trump administration just being chaotic and kind of eating and destroying itself? And I think it falls somewhere in between, because you can use that chaos to enact your means without actually necessarily having to be directly involved. You can create indirect influences upon Trump that then gets him to act in certain ways. Because
Agreed.
As you and Andrew were talking, right, it's a battle between a sociopath and a narcissist. And if the sociopath has control of the situation, and that's all they want, right? Is to be the one that comes out on top, no matter the cost, right? The narcissist, there's a cost. There's always a cost, and it's perception of self. And so I think what you're seeing here is both Elon Musk and Donald Trump being used by malign foreign influence to tear apart the international post-World War II geopolitical order. I mean, that's what I would say is going on here. Now, I don't think most Americans think that, and I don't think most Americans understand that, because they simply aren't informed, or they don't care is the other thing. That I think a lot of people are not talking about is the fact that, like, your average American probably doesn't care.
Yeah, and going back to this point and that is true. How much interest you have in foreign affairs when you've got your own domestic issues, your day-to-day travails and struggles. And, I'm struggling with my healthcare, or to get a job, or struggling with this, or I have, what's going on in Ukraine is of little consequence. But it's the understanding that, the US is in the position it is in because of being at the top of the global hegemony for as long as it has been. And so actually this does affect you, but it's just not immediately obvious. And actually you've got to do an awful lot of work to learn about how things work in order to see how this might affect you. So, like, I understand why people don't care about this, but they should care, or at least it's important. Whether you care about it or not, it's important that your government is doing things. But to your point, and Jonathan Fink and Andrew's points about, my view is that Trump is not knowledgeable enough on these things and doesn't have this 4D chess plan. But that's not to say people in his administration don't have that plan or an ideological agenda, and they very much do. So I think Project 2025 is what is driving the administration. It's just that Trump doesn't, like, he stood up and said, I've not read, but he doesn't read, right? So of course he hasn't read a 900-page document on Project 2025. But he was right to say, oh, yeah, I don't really know much about it. He probably didn't know much about it, and probably doesn't know much about it. He has people around him telling him what he's doing, what he's signing. Those executive orders that he signs, and someone explains to him what they are, and he goes, oh, yeah, that's a good one. Like, he doesn't know he's not driving that. He is being driven by others. So he spitballs very often, throws stuff against the wall, but not because he's got a plan of, like, taking that, or I want to see what works and I'm going to take that. He's just literally bare. He has people around him who are nefarious, and then he has foreign state actors who are able to manipulate him as well. And essentially Trump is just a victim of all of these influences, and that means that the US is itself a victim of all of these influences.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's largely true. Um, and I think what you're seeing there is like holdovers from the previous administration that had these sort of ideas and had these tendencies, but were um, either restrained or balanced out, right? Because we've also talked about this, or not we, but you've mentioned this with other discussions, right? Like the recency bias that Trump definitely has, because you can tell how he changes his rhetoric just based on how the public discussion is being framed. If you take a look at the larger media discussion, he's not going to say anything that necessarily disrupts the media coverage that he likes. So he's going to formulate his opinion on any given issue based on that. So with that recency bias, I think like you now have those more sane perspectives marginalized or completely excoriated from the administration completely now. And like you said, it's now these people that do have actual regimented plans and ideas, and whether these plans and ideas are really meant to make any changes at all is, I think, debatable too. Getting back to that idea of muzzle velocity that you've discussed with Steve Bannon. So I think part of Project 2025 and the larger strategy here is create a stream of BS, some of which might have real impact on people, but largely most of it might not. Because either it's going to have to go through a years or months long legal battle before any result actually manifests from it, or because it's just, like renaming the Gulf of Mexico, and then you have all of the collective American press wasting how many days covering that? Whereas that's like, as a history teacher, like I hate that he did that. I really do. You can't just, I mean, that gets into a discussion of like political realism and stuff like that, and yeah, I don't really want to go down
But
that
it's the
route.
unilateral
Like,
decision to do that.
On the net, but
yeah, you can rename things, but like, let's have a discussion, let's come to a consensus, let's but just a single person going, we're going to do that, and then it's done, and then if you don't call it that, you're not allowed in the White House. JD Vance goes to Europe and says, screw you guys suck because you don't have freedom of press and freedom of speech, and then at the same time in the US they're banning Associated Press from the White House for continuing to use the term Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, and so it's and I myself find myself falling victim to that strategy, right? Because I become emotionally now invested in something that is, in the scheme of things, relatively inconsequential given the rest of what's going on here, the gravity and the scale of what's going on in other realms of his administration. So I think that's part of it as well, is the chaos is designed to create the muzzle velocity, which then obfuscates, sows doubt. And honestly, it tires the reader out. It tires the listener out. And you're going to become so overwhelmed that you are going to fall into whatever sort of niche really supports what you already think. And you're going to be less likely to challenge your own perspectives, or maybe even to seek out perspectives at all. You may disengage from the media environment altogether, where you'll see that like in societies like Russia, where you'll see there's people who, they watch the news, but then they call themselves apolitical, right? And we're starting to see, I mean, not starting to see it, we have seen that in the United States quite a bit, where it's like, oh, I'm not political, but, and then there's this other sort of political idea that they have, but it's this apoliticization of or depoliticization of the society, so that they fall in line with the authoritarian agenda, and go along with what's easy, or with what seems simple, or what has been manufactured in their own media environment to be true.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah, so much to say. I just want to react to March for Humanity. Says Trump is not a victim. Jonathan, please take that back. He has evaded accountability all his life. I won't take that, but my point is that Trump is fairly ideologically vacuous. He also has some idea. I think he is racist. I think there's evidence to suggest that, and I don't really waste too much time talking about that, but there's plenty of evidence to suggest that. But I think he is quite ideologically vacuous, and that means he's very easy to manipulate. We saw this in the recency bias that you've already mentioned. We saw this at Helsinki 2018, where he spoke to Putin on his own. Putin was able to manipulate him to then come out and say exactly what Putin wanted him to say. You've got the Russian press at the moment absolutely loving the fact that Putin seems to be in the palm of Trump is in the palm of Putin's hand and is doing all the things at the moment to undo NATO, to undo the American hegemony, to get rid of US aid, which is, soft power around the world, to screw over Ukraine. Putin is freaking laughing. So on the one hand, this is Trump. Trump is responsible for this because he's the head of, he's the CEO of the United States. But on the other hand, I think he is just very easy to manipulate. He isn't this strong man leader that he wants himself to be, that many of his supporters think he is. He is not strong. He's actually quite weak. He doesn't stand up very well to people who push back on him big time. He doesn't really know what's going on. He was asked the other day about Elon Musk meeting Narendra Modi in the White House, and he didn't know what was going on there. And it was delightful, but freaking outrageous that he was asked, is Musk meeting Modi as a member of the US government, as an employee of the US government, or as a businessman? Bear in mind, this meeting was in the White House, and Trump didn't know. He didn't know how to answer that, and he said, "Well, I think he's as a businessman. He wants to improve his businesses, et cetera, et cetera." It's like, well, how is he using the White House to market his companies to an international leader? Surely that's illegal. Surely there's emoluments clauses or whatever. I don't know, but that isn't right. And so the idea is that, for me, is that Trump isn't a strong leader. He's actually a really weak leader. And as such, being easy to manipulate, it makes him a victim. But maybe the choice of the word victim isn't like, oh, poor me. It's like, no, I'm not going to poor you, Trump, but you are a victim because you are weak. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I think you explained it pretty well there. He's a victim to his own vices in a way. His own flaws have given him vulnerabilities that now can be exploited. And it's not to say, when we say he's a victim, we don't need to necessarily empathize with him. We're not trying to create an empathetic picture of Trump here at all, right? Rather, these vulnerabilities are now national security problems, and larger than that, global security. Not national security, it's global security at this point. Now that we have this discussion of Mike Lee from Utah there discussing whether or not we leave NATO or not, and I didn't think that these conversations would necessarily happen if you asked me about this a year ago. But as this year has progressed, right, this is a conversation that has been sort of looming. And I think a lot of people have not necessarily taken the possibility of a US exit from NATO as seriously as I think they should be, because if this goes south, Trump is going to do whatever he can to save face, to maybe torpedo the situation, to make it look like he comes out on top, right? In any way possible, it's not his fault. So if that Afghanistan situation happens, right, like you and Andrew had talked about, how Trump, as a narcissist, he cannot have another Afghanistan. He cannot have that in Ukraine. If he finds a way to shift the blame onto the Europeans.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because already you see inflation is going up in the US and he's blaming it on Biden already. So he is just so I've said this before, and I'm really sorry I'm not kind of slagging off my own family, but I have a child who is very similar to Donald Trump, right? So he has something called pathological demand avoidance. There are loads of overlaps with narcissistic personality disorder. And so there are loads of things where I'm like, oh my goodness, I see these parallels and I'm like, no, where he physically, pathologically cannot take responsibility for anything he's done wrong. So at school, this means there's loads of problems. He just can't, like, he had to give up football because his coach thought, I can't coach him. Like, he would be slagging off the opposing team or the referee for, like, his own team not playing well enough or losing because the other team was better. They couldn't be better. He couldn't take responsibility for his own performance. So it was, you guys are cheating, or the referee's cheating, or whatever. And that's exactly what Trump does. Like, is that he has a pathological inability to accept responsibility for things that are clearly his responsibility. Now, he's gone through life doing that, and he was told by, who was that lawyer that influenced him very, very, when he was much younger, for like a decade or whatever, the lawyer that was involved in McCarthy, Cohn, was it Cohn, that basically taught him never to accept that you're wrong. Like, you're never wrong, never accept it publicly. And he does that. But it just means that if it goes wrong in Ukraine, as you were saying, that he will just be accusing the Europeans as being responsible for this. And just like Biden, was responsible for Afghanistan, even though that Trump signed the Doha deal, and it was his deal that he did with the Taliban over, just like he's gone over Ukraine's head to do deals with Russia at the moment. He went over the Afghan government to do deals with the Taliban in the Doha agreement. That's what Trump is doing right again. So yeah, I completely agree with you. Sorry, I interrupted you though.
No, absolutely. I think that's generally what we have going on here. Is Trump trying to find ways to, and let's keep in mind, right, like, who is his audience for his narcissism? Because that I think is really important, because Trump doesn't care what Europeans think about him.
No,
he doesn't.
Well, he doesn't like Europeans, really.
Yeah. If he doesn't like you, he doesn't care. He doesn't care at all what you think about him, as long as it plays to the people that show up at his rallies. Then he feels fulfilled, ultimately, right? As long as there's a Trump fort in Poland, or Fort Trump in Poland, or a Trump face on Mount Rushmore, right? Doesn't matter what he actually does. That's, for him, that's legacy. That's cult of personality. That's acceptance. That's what he's after ultimately, is like this desire to be liked.
Yeah. Well, Mitch Mazerol says, given DJT's extortive past with Ukraine, do you see any reason that he hasn't already floated back-channel demands to Zelensky at the urging of his sycophants, notwithstanding those made publicly? I think the mineral 50% of your natural resources was a good example of that, whether you call that public or not. I mean, it was given to him sort of publicly, privately. We don't know exactly what the details of that were, but they were demands that were so unrealistic, I gather, for Ukraine, that it was like, no, you're not treating us like an African nation in the 1800s. This is not, but then it goes back to that image I showed of carving up Ukraine. And that's what, so I just think the US has really moved, and I really feel strongly about this. The US has moved from being an ally to being a mediator, and they don't care for the outcome of Ukraine politically or morally. They just care, or when I say they, I mean the Trump administration. Trump administration cares only for them, or the US, in some kind of transactional way, gaining from the peace talks. Like, the peace talks are only successful, like the metrics of success for the peace talks for the United States is nothing to do with Ukraine. The metrics of success is, do the US come out the peace talks in a better position than the US went into the peace talks, even though this is peace about Ukraine? That is how I see it going, and prove me wrong is all I would say to anyone else, because they don't appear to be particularly concerned with the moral political outcome for Ukraine.
Yeah, and what is that idea of a better position for the US, right? I think that idea of a better position can be manipulated and played to the US political base however Trump sees fit.
So in other words, if NATO is weakened, that is a better position for the US, you could argue, or if
could be.
Or if the US is pulling out of Europe and therefore not expending so much money on European defense, then that is better for the US.
Yeah. So it could be self-sabotaging completely, but you can always market it as something else, right?
Mm.
As long as you this is getting into like Edward Bernays kind of like marketing stuff, but if you create some sort of like symbolic meaning behind any ideology or action, then people are going to latch onto that and they'll feel like they're doing the right thing, right? So I think if you can create some sort of America first um emotional hook, line and sinker into the American political discourse, then you'll get your sort of bottom of the barrel Trumpers and whoever else, right? To kind of be like, okay, war's over, good, done, right? And I think that's actually maybe where like the line of well, this is a success, this is a failure, is if the war ends, doesn't matter what it is. I think a lot of Americans are likely to see that as successful, as
Absolutely.
better
I mean, yeah,
when
and
that's
yeah, and there are hallmarks of the 1930s America First movement. So it's really worth remembering that America First, the Charles Lindbergh sort of era, was exactly what we see now. I mean, there is, I mean, it was a purposeful resurrection of the America First like name. First of all, like we've already seen America First. It was, save our sons, no convoys, no war, no death for American boys. Join America First Committee, help us in our fight. That's a fight against sending Americans into Europe. There was a great placard. I can't find it at the moment. There's a really interesting placard. It was like we should be doing peace with Hitler. And it was one of the famous America First placards. And you're like, really? Yeah. So here, remember Dunkirk. I did not raise my boy to die for Britain. So on and so forth. That kind of positioning, which is exactly what we're seeing now. This is America First 2.0. And they only got involved, of course, the Americans. Your country only got involved really because Pearl Harbor happened and they were forced into World War II. But it's interesting to wonder an alternative history of if Pearl Harbor didn't happen, whether the US would have been coming to the aid of Europe and whether we'd have the history we presently have at all. But yeah, this is scarily reminiscent of the 1930s.
Yeah, I think that's interesting as well because the United States history curriculum, being a history teacher, a former history teacher myself, does not talk about that movement at all.
So sorry, say that again. What doesn't talk about that? The curriculum.
Most U.S. history curriculums, now it differs by state, obviously, but you do not find that in most U.S. history textbooks, even at the advanced placement level. You'll find mention of Charles Lindbergh, but you won't find a deep dive into the America First movement. You'll hear, you might find like a paragraph or two, maybe in some textbooks used in different high schools or elementary schools throughout the country that might mention it in a paragraph or two, but you're not gonna get a deep dive into that. So I think, interestingly, a lot of Americans don't know about that America First movement. They don't know who Charles Lindbergh is, because our education system is fundamentally broken in a lot of ways. And so I think that's what in a lot of ways has led us to sort of, I don't like to say repeating, but kind of rhyming with history again. It's very interesting.
It's fascinating. I'm really annoyed that I can't find that placard because it basically sums everything up as far as I'm concerned. But nevertheless, you get the point. Yeah. It's just fascinating how, as you say, history it doesn't necessarily repeat, but it certainly rhymes, and some of those rhyming couplets are pretty egregious. But yes. So what are your thoughts on what might well happen going forward over the next couple of weeks. Obviously, there are so many spinning plates, so many variables. It's very difficult to be predictive, of course. But what do you think the US's position will be? What do you think Europe will come back with? Where do you think this might end up? What do you think do you think that we'll get a ceasefire by Easter, as Donald Trump has dictated?
I would be very skeptical of any timelines that are presented by this administration. As we've seen, you can't trust the word that comes out of the mouth, or statements that are given to the press, right? So like, whether it's day one, I'm ending it, the first 100 days, maybe a year, right? Like, you have these dates floating around as to when, there might be some kind of ceasefire. I hope there isn't a ceasefire. And I think in Tochny yesterday, we made a pretty good case as to why a ceasefire could be a problematic experiment, if you want to put it that way.
I haven't listened to that yet. I want to listen to that. Thierry Schmidlin was saying that I should listen to that. Give me a synopsis, because I think I completely agree. I think at the moment Russia are in a spot of bother in terms of material, in terms of personnel, in terms of economy, and this is a time where you want a good 6 months of pressure on Russia, with aid coming freely through to Ukraine, both economic sanctions and military aid and ammunition. And actually, Ukraine could then do the early negotiations on the battlefield to put Russia under a lot of pressure, and then you go to negotiations. Was that kind of what you were talking about?
Yeah. So what was being floated were these ideas of a tentative ceasefire, then going in, like, as it stands, right? Or any kind of, I guess, variation of ceasefire you want to kind of put out there. But just the fundamental idea of or the way Russia approaches ceasefires historically shows you that this is maybe kind of dead on launch, right? I don't know. I'm not using the correct phrase there, or idiom there, but I think it's a failure to launch, right? It's dead on arrival. There we go. So both of those. I think it's a situation where it's easier to violate a ceasefire now than it ever has been, especially with drone warfare being what it is. In terms of violations of the ceasefires in the first sort of wave of the conflict, from 2014 up to 2022, we see like mortars and artillery and small arms fire, right, being the major way that ceasefire violations are being conducted. But now you have cheaper options, more accessible options, and honestly, it's kind of hard to prove if you're both operating Mavic 3 drones. It's kind of hard to prove whose it is, potentially. So then there's this aspect of obfuscation of like false flags and things like that. So you fall into this scenario where, like, okay, number one, the way Russia conducts itself during ceasefires probably makes this a bad idea just at the get-go. But if we delve further into it, like the social ramifications for both Russia and Ukraine, demobilizing right now is not what you want to do. Demobilization is an economic disaster, or potentially a political disaster. Take a look at what would happen if we saw a massive demobilization after a ceasefire in Ukraine, right? All these servicemen going back into society, the front line becomes much more porous, and that then creates, like, if a second not a second, but another violation of a ceasefire occurs afterwards, of this, Minsk 3 agreement that we're sort of heading into. I don't necessarily want to call it that, but that's kind of how it's like shaping up in terms of some of the policy that people are floating out there. But maybe it's worse than Minsk 3 in other aspects, or Minsk 2 in other aspects. We will see, I think, a situation where Ukraine will struggle to remobilize its army in the event of another Russian attack, right? And so then you're seeing like European nations floating this idea of automatic NATO to kind of prevent that. that's also where the European blocking force comes into play, right?
Yeah.
To prevent, the fallout of demobilization of the Ukrainian military. But I think we're going to see massive desertions potentially. If a ceasefire comes into effect, there might not even be guys that are demobilizing. There might be guys that just straight up desert if they know that the conflict, or think that the conflict, is no longer on the line. Because the reality of the situation is this, right? Like, yes, they want to defend their country, but also it is absolutely horrifying and terrifying to be at the front. And I don't think anyone willingly wants to. Well, that's not true. There are people that willingly want to be at the front, but a majority of human beings do not want to be living under artillery shelling or a back and forth kind of gray zone between a ceasefire, some sort of no man's land, some sort of DMZ. People don't want to be there, right? People want to be back with their families. Most of Ukraine's soldiers are not career soldiers, right? They are mobilized civilians who are fighting to defend their land. So I think most people are going to want to go back home. And that's going to present a major, major problem for remobilizing and demobilizing. So I think like a ceasefire right now, like that creates economic fallout, that creates potential military vulnerabilities for Ukraine. And I would defer to the conversation between Colby and Fabian and Erland about this topic in the Tochny stream yesterday, because they get into a whole other range of possibilities of what can Europe do. Very much a Europe-centric kind of piece, where it's so what does Europe do in the event of a ceasefire? What does Europe do going forward in the event that the U.S. really does kind of pull out here? And Fabian actually talked about that in his most recent Substack as well. So I recommend people read that as well. Missile Matters.
So one of my and thank you for that, Brendan. One of my concerns is that, and I think Europe does need to just take over now, like, because the US wants its cake and then also wants to eat it. So it wants to have its cake over there. I don't want to eat that, but I'm going to eat it and have both. No, they want Europe to take control over this. They want Europe to pay for this, but then they want to be able to dictate the peace deal. They want to be able to help themselves to Ukrainian natural resources. And no, you can't have everything. So do you know what? We will take over. We'll do what you said. We'll take over this. We'll own this. And we'll also put a framework in place for an eventual negotiated peace settlement. But it means you're not going to be a part of this. And if we're bringing $300 billion of frozen Russian assets to the table, then actually this is meaningful. And we now hold a lot more cards. Yeah. But then what I worry is that the US gets retributive. We know that Trump he won't like being sidelined. He knows that his legacy goes. He wants a Nobel Peace Prize, and that he hates it if he's snubbed. Now, if he feels that they are snubbed, then he will lift sanctions on Russia. He will just do everything to appease Russia. And then we're into a really horrible situation. So I think it's such a difficult path to navigate for both Zelensky and Europe to make sure that they do take over from the US, but that somehow doesn't piss off doesn't piss off Trump. And I don't know that that's at all remotely possible.
I would agree. I think what has been engineered here by Russia and its international, you could say allies, but international partners. I think it's sort of the Sino-Soviet split in reverse. That's what we're in the midst of here. And I think the more we come to terms with that, I don't think the US is lost completely. I really want to emphasize that the midterm elections are going to be very consequential for how the rest of Trump's term could go. And
before that, actually,
America looks like.
So just to explain to the non-Americans out there, in between every presidential election, which is every 4 years, every 2 years, you have your House of Representatives, your lawmakers, about 438 of them, I think, in Congress. And it might be a different amount at the moment, but
35.
Yeah, 435. So they are up for election every 2 years. So they're constantly campaigning. Every 6 years, senators are up for grabs, which means that actually it's not every 6 years, it's a third of them every 2 years. So it means between a presidential election, which is every 4 years, you have a midterm election every 2 years, so, or the 2 years in between. That is when the entire the entire House of Representatives is up for election, and a third of the senators. So if Trump makes such a hash, and if the media is able to communicate that to the audience of Fox viewers enough, then you could get a pushback against Trump. And if the economy tanks, if tariffs hit inflation, and et cetera, then you could get a repudiation of Trump at the midterm elections, which means he loses, well, at least the House of Representatives, possibly the Senate, depending. And if that's the case, then he's a lame duck president for the last 2 years. But then we're also seeing Trump going against courts at the moment. So he's almost becoming like a dictator, whereby he's doing things illegally through Doge, sacking people, getting rid of attorneys general, getting rid of everyone. We've heard today that more FAA, the Federal Aviation Authority, people have been sacked. You've had more plane crashes in at the beginning of a presidency than any other president in the history of the world. So, you know, what's going on there? Anyway, but he's pushing the envelope and doing this knowingly, illegally, and then trying to really poke the courts into seeing what they're going to do about it, if they can do anything, and then maybe overrule, not necessarily overruling the courts, but just saying, I don't care what you're going to do. You've ruled that. So the courts, for example, have ruled that actually he's got to freeze the cutting of USAID funding. He's got to do this. He's got to do it. He's got to destroy. Doge has to destroy the all of the data that they've picked up from the Treasury, et cetera, et cetera. Have they done that? Almost certainly not. So, you know, courts can say whatever they like, but if you decide not to do anything and there's no enforcement of those laws, because you control the enforcement agencies and you control the FBI and you control the CIA, then you have a compromised political system where the checks and balances have been removed. So when you're worried, when you're thinking, well, I mean, this is worst case scenario, right? But you're thinking midterm elections come along and they could really put a dent in what Trump wants to do. But essentially, Congress is irrelevant at the moment. So I don't know. That's my worst case kind of doomsaying.
No, I agree. So yeah, at the moment right now, like Congress is very much willing, and we've seen Mike Johnson's statements on this, right? There's been this discussion of like, okay, so who has the power of the purse? Right?
House of Representatives, technically.
Well, yeah, exactly. So is it the executive branch, or is it constitutionally, as it says, a right given to our elected body, right? To our legislative branch? And they've been willing to kind of defer to the executive in this case. So we're seeing the legislative branch actually sort of self-censoring their own checks and balances against the executive's wishes, right? We might see that within the judicial system, as you pointed out. So yeah, the midterm elections, they could be inconsequential, but I would argue also like Congress could be doing a lot more and isn't, because it's choosing to, right? Because of who you have in certain positions within Congress, it's choosing not to act. And if you had the other party in charge, I think you would see a lot more action. And well, maybe not. I don't know. Personally, I find the lack of leadership in the Democratic Party right now to be pretty abysmal.
Yeah, there's a gerontocracy going on, and there's certainly a need to, I think, shed some of the older people off and then get the young people who are much more engaged with social media. You don't want to just give up and say it should all be social media, but people that can talk to their audience much more effectively. So AOC and those kind of people, I know they're quite divisive and people on the right don't like them, but these are the people that can talk in populist terms that are really, I think, positive and engaging. Just going back, the other thing that's worth noting about the American political situation at the moment is that there is a very, 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 very narrow majority in the House of Representatives of 217 to 215. And all that means is that you need two special elections, and which I think are due to come. So special elections are when people, I don't know, die or they get moved to a position in the cabinet, for example, and then you need to replace them. So out of the 2-year cycles, there will be, I think there are 3 elections coming up, and if the Democrats pick up all those 3 elections, then they have the majority in the House of Representatives, which then means that they have the Speaker. So that Mike Johnson then becomes a minority Speaker, and Hakeem Jeffries becomes the majority Speaker for the House of Representatives. So these are the guys that hold the purse strings. House of Representatives, the Senate, okay, there's still a majority, but the Senate's somewhat more sensible than House of Representatives in terms of some of the Republicans who will be there. They're like kind of long-term people who are more interested in foreign policy, etc., etc. And so at the moment, the problem is that Mike Johnson won't even we use this term differently in the UK. He won't table a motion. You guys call tabling as stopping something. We call it as starting it. So, he won't table a motion because he's told not to by the powers that be. Well, actually, Hakeem Jeffries will be in a very different situation there. And so special elections, if Congress is going to retain its kind of power, and it's not just in the executive branch, as in the president and vice president, then you have a chance that even before the midterm elections, that the Democrats could retake the House of Representatives, and that could dent Trump's ability to pass all these things he's trying to do. Not that he's trying to pass it; he's just like doing it.
Yeah, it would provide. It's one path towards providing some pushback against the sort of authoritarian, all-out muzzle velocity that we've seen so far in terms of what the administration's been up to. So I think that's one path towards some sort of resistance. I won't say normalcy, because obviously nothing about this is politically normal in U.S. history. Maybe in other places. I think of, like, he quoted Napoleon Bonaparte the other day, and I also think back to the French revolutionaries as well, and the revolutionary calendar, where they completely destroyed the calendar and de-Christianized the calendar, created their own reality that they lived in. And that's kind of
not sure that's what they'd want either. But yeah.
But I mean, there's some things about it that kind of make me think, like, a lot of people are framing this conversation as conservatives versus progressives in the United States. And I think the more that we think of MAGA Republicans as conservative, the more off mark we're getting.
Yeah, because they're not conservative.
No, they're reactionary radicals.
Yeah,
they're reactionary radicals. They're like, what you're seeing here is actually the Democratic Party is becoming the conservative party of the United States in a weird way. Like it's
totally true. So
conservatism as like resistance to change over time, rather than just like a set list of ideology, right?
You're absolutely right. So the idea that norms and rules and institutions, the Democrats, weirdly, that used to be like the kind of progressive, or like, we want to tear things up and start again and do things, and you guys like, and you and your kind of old fuddy-duddy institutions, it's completely 180 flipped. So the Democrats are fighting hard for the institutions to remain, and the MAGA Republicans have come in and they're burning everything down, and that is not conservatism. So, like, weirdly, I've become pro-conservative recently in a kind of like as a centre-left person, but I believe in the rules and norms. I believe in the rule of law, and I believe in the institutions of the American government that keep the executive branch in place with their checks and balances. And I think those things should be conserved. So I am in an institutional way an institutional conservative, and Republicans at the moment have eschewed their conservatism, and they are no longer conservative. And we've got the same problem in the UK with reform coming along. There's these right-wing populists that want to kind of burn everything down, do the Doge thing. Dominic Cummings is behind that as well, I would think. You've got Elon Musk possibly giving $100 million to Reform Party, and they just want to do the same over here. And you've got a split in the big C conservative party, whereby they don't know, reforms come along, MAGA has come along, and they don't know how to react. Do they become MAGA, or do they, or make Britain great again? Do they become reform, or do they create a niche for themselves as a truly small C conservative party, and sit on the kind of center right rather than the far right, which is exactly what the Republicans at the moment in America are wondering. But because you have a really strict two-party system, you can't develop another party, and so it stops them from forming their own party, because of the first past the post political system would just mean that Democrats would take everything, because you'd split the entire party and they wouldn't be able to, it would be chaos. Well, it'd be great for Democrats, but the Republicans know they can't go and split into a new party, so they're forced to remain with the MAGA Republicans. But there are two different beasts there. You've got your Adam Kinzinger, Republicans, and all the other people that are aligned with him, and not knowing they don't have a home anymore. And I know many people on my own threads saying that Liz Cheney, that's what I was thinking of. Many people on my own threads are admitting that they are Republicans that do not adhere to MAGA Republicanism and don't have a home, and they don't know what to do.
Yeah. I think it if you go back and look at the sort of political history and the political development of it all, you can see how, and I think it goes back to legitimizing Sarah Palin as a running mate, legitimizing the Tea Party as a as a faction of the Republican Party, and not pushing back against that and saying, like, what is that? Who are these people? This is actually insane. And that was the attitude from a lot of Republicans early on, but we've seen how the normalization of that, through, I think, Sarah Palin's vice presidential candidacy, then allowed the Tea Party sort of policy to become the norm of discussion, political discussion within the United States. Because you look at the 2012 election after that, and you have sort of the birther myths gone absolutely rabid by the 2012 election between Obama and Romney. Even though, we have Mitt Romney vehemently denying association with that kind of ideology, he still, as the leader of the Republican ticket at that time, I don't think pushed back hard enough ideologically against that faction, and we saw it just continue to grow, right? And so a lot of people in the United States have this fallacy of, like, Trump created this, but no, he tapped into something that was already there. He tapped into something that was already been legitimized by the political process, and by the, I would say we need to be looking at people at the top of the RNC, like Michael Steele, and having some honest conversations about, like, what were you thinking? Like, in terms of extending olive branches to these
power. So you think about how you get into power, and so you extend olive branches to these because you want a broad church and you want as many people voting for you, but then you realize that you unleash the Kraken. And it's very problematic. But by the way, I found that placard eventually. Hitler has not attacked us. Why attack Hitler? Why not peace with Hitler? Europe for Europeans, America for Americans. And that is broadly what we're seeing with that MAGA right at the moment, which is Hitler appeasement, Putin appeasement. And I'm deeply, deeply worried about where we are going to see this. And it just really depends as to how strong Europe can be without pissing off America too much, that America then becomes overtly an ally of Russia. But then if that happens, would you get the Congress kicking up a stink? And I hope you would, because that would be unconscionable to many. And I also wonder what the Department of Defense think, right? Because they are an institution that are full of career military people who are absolutely born and brought up on a diet of Russia, the bad guys, and we spend our entire lives fighting against the bad guys. And then you get a change of government saying, oh, by the way, you know who you thought the bad guys were, I'm telling you they're not, type thing. But I wonder how the DOD is reacting to this, whether they're like deeply concerned about actually what the president is doing, and whether, not that you get a military coup, but whether there would be enough tangible pushback from the DOD if there was any decision from Trump that was too problematic. I don't know. I don't know enough about how it works.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the temperature is like at the DOD. I mean, so what I will say is the Undersecretary for Defense Policy, Elbridge Colby. Have you come across him? Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah. So I don't know if the Undersecretary of Defense Policy is part of the DoD specifically. I would need to look that up. But I think what we have here is like we have appointees, and the bureaucratic system is in the process of being cleaned out. You have sort of the ideological tests that are coming along in terms of the hiring processes for people working at intelligence agencies, CIA, FBI, and other institutions. So do you think January 6th was such and such a thing? And yes or no? Okay, we allow you to be an employee or not. So I think you'll find that the resistance that is there may be sort of forced out potentially already, or may be so small that it's not significant. But I mean, this is just speculation on my part. But what I will say is that there is infiltration of the institutions by officials who hold views that are hostile to Europe and hostile to Ukraine, and friendly towards Russia. Just straight up friendly towards Russia. I mean, This is the whole reason why I learned Russian language and Ukraine, and why I'm learning Ukrainian language right now, is because I need to understand what these people are saying. I need to know how the enemy speaks, because there's no illusion in my mind as to who the main threat is here for my democracy. It's Russian infiltration through and through.
Absolutely. And goodness me, we need, I mean, I don't know if we're going to have time to talk about what we were originally going to talk about, which is like Kherson. And but actually, if you're willing to come on, within a week, we can do all of that. Like, I'm always welcome to have you on. If you've got the time for me, I've got the time for you.
Certainly, yeah.
But I don't. So I don't. It would seem a bit of a weird segue to now go on and talk about our main topic. So let's remain on this until the end, then, if you don't mind. So you are something of, I don't know, not an expert, maybe. I don't know. Maybe you are, or an autodidact. You taught yourself about disinformation. Is that correct? And did you do a thesis on it actually?
Yeah. So in college, or university, I was looking at how bot networks on Twitter were subverting the political discussion in Europe during Brexit. So this was around like 2017, 2018. I was looking at Eurosceptic accounts throughout sort of the information space. And oddly enough, a lot of them were coming out of South Africa, which was very interesting. In terms of creating Eurosceptic views, specifically directed towards migrants. And I looked maybe 6 months ago, maybe back at one of the accounts to see if it was still there, because I honestly hadn't checked to see if the account had ever been destroyed or just abandoned, because it was, a relatively inconsequential account. But it was like SA News Today or something like that, trying to portray itself as a news organization. And you'd find that like a lot of the news stories were about sort of like land reclamation, laws that you see, at least recently. That's what we're seeing. So like we have this discussion going on in the United States about South African laws, like that matters at all. What South Africa does to its constitution for us. I don't know why that's part of the political discourse in the United States right now, other
Because
than the fact that
David Sachs, Elon Musk, and Peter Thiel. There
yeah,
you go.
exactly. So we have this discussion going on about land confiscation, I guess is a way of putting it, which is constitutionally something that is legal in the United States. And it's actually the same methods as to which Donald Trump used to seize territory to build the border wall along the US-Mexico border when he took territory, land owned by private citizens, by Texas farmers, and used this process called eminent domain to make that. Right. So this is something like that's constitutionally legal in the United States already, but they're putting it into this sort of racial framework and then sort of using it as I think ammunition to kind of create this idea of global woke, right? Global woke is coming for all of us. And see like the DEI it's a problem over here and the DEI is a problem over there. Like I think it creates this sort of perception of reality for the audience back in the United States that this is a global movement against those that would hurt us, just in not even a specific enemy, right? Like they're very ambiguous as to who they paint as their enemy, like where you could just say woke, the left, right? Not specific, or just say like George Soros cronies, right? It doesn't get into the specifics of what are you actually against, who are you actually against, who are these supposed foreign malign influences, this global woke that's coming after us, right? So I think you have this sort of manufacture of this whole like worldview, this whole perception of reality that is distorted, but by using this rhetoric that we've seen already in the United States, but just put into a geopolitical sense, to give Americans this idea that America is better and moving in a direction that is better, right? Whatever better means, it's ambiguous. It's the meaning of better can be manipulated to mean whatever kind of number of things. It's just how you psychologically frame it for your audience.
I came across this morning. I don't know the provenance of this. So again, a post about disinformation that could be itself disinformative. But Estonian cybersecurity expert says, I don't know who, up to 70, which is why I asked underneath, do you have a source for this? Very interested. Up to 70% of claimed European located Twitter accounts are AI bots or people working for troll farms. And I had Benny Pie, who is hopefully still listening to this, one of the guys that helps me a lot. He was saying that how easy it is to create these kind of AI bots. And then, in fact, I think below that, we have somebody that's like says, not surprised, wasn't sure if I should say this, but screw it, right? It's just sharing a proof of concept. Only took another hour or so of testing, and now it can log in, open up a specific tweet, reply to it, QT it, RT it, so retweet it, and like it. Bad actors just scaled this up by thousands. So this is some AI guy has just created in an hour, just learned how to create a bot that can go and do all those things online. Now, if you're something like the Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg, you've done that by like 50,000, 100,000, 200,000. So the idea that on Twitter, 70% of European located Twitter accounts are AI bots and trolls is eminently plausible and incredibly disturbing. So
yeah.
and you know, you've got your background in researching this back all the way back in 2018 due to the 2016 Brexit referendum, which Twitter and Facebook have admitted was manipulated by Russian troll and bot farms. We don't know whether it would have made any difference to the election, etc., etc. So it's not about it's an invalid vote or anything like that. But we need to protect ourselves democratically against this. And then I'll add on, before letting you go for it, I'll add on to this that Doge has just got rid of the department in the United States that looks at foreign interference in US elections. So they're like, we don't care about interference in our elections because they're generally going to be trying to get someone like Trump in charge. So we'll get rid of that. That's uncomfortable. In fact, bring it on. Please interfere if it's going to promote us, because, and it still will, no matter what goes on with this peace. And you could argue that Russia are already manipulating Trump in these peace plans, but Trump and his administration is going and torching everything in the US and torching potentially NATO. Everything that is happening is to the benefit of Russia at the moment. Everything in the US government is to the benefit of Russia. There isn't one thing I can think that has been to the benefit of Ukraine or democracy. Not one single thing. And so they will continue to support Trump and that kind of approach. And no wonder they've got rid of the department that looks into stopping that from happening. But anyway, what do you think about this idea that perhaps 70% of European located Twitter accounts are bots or AI bots or trolls?
Yeah. So I think it's highly plausible. I myself have noticed in the United States an uptick in other bot accounts as well. So like you might have noticed recently, and so one thing I want to say before jumping into this any further is the check mark.
I write articles on that.
Check mark was the linchpin. That was the linchpin of legitimacy in information, trust, public trust in information and in officials, in anything. So when you remove that and make it pay to play, bot accounts can become verified. And then you really have no idea what exactly you're dealing with. It's more of that manufacture of doubt as to whether or not this is a legitimate source or not, right? So I think that was part of it, right? Is removing legitimacy, make it pay to play, and then it allows bot accounts to gain that legitimacy. And you see like bot accounts associated with the identities of former presidents. I don't know if you've seen like sort of like the verified like George Washington accounts or Thomas Jefferson accounts that are going out there and just spreading all kinds of like right-wing populist propaganda across.
Yeah.
This is if you look at the man's statements from history, it's absolutely in contrast to what's being put out here, because it's really like these accounts serve to interact with Elon Musk in a lot of ways, I find. And a lot of the accounts that Elon Musk, I would really like to see someone like Ryan McBeth look into this with like Velocity software or something like that, to be able to look with real cybersecurity software that I can't afford, to tear apart these bot accounts and to be able to see like what is actually going on here. Are there authentic actors behind this account, or is this an AI generated piece of garbage, right? Like the Thomas Jefferson account, the George Washington account, or any of the sort of accounts that Elon Musk's likes to favorite or retweet. There's one that's like some sort of like trucker dad personality that it tries to co-op, where it's like a Southern trucker dad and he's like, whoa, this is crazy. Video of somebody getting hit by a car. And then it's like the next thing is like actually right-wing politics. It's just this very odd sort of combination of topics and content and what the account is posting, how often it's posting. You're seeing like, every 20-30 minutes there's some sort of video unsourced. We don't know where the video is coming from. The account has the video, I assume. So is this person spending all day on the internet just downloading all these crazy videos of car accidents off of LiveLeak and then putting them interspersed with their right-wing politics to generate likes and interest? Because like they say, you like can't look away from a car accident, right? Like rubbernecking and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I honestly think that that's part of the strategy as well, is these verified accounts that I think are managed by teams of people that are looking in, have Ryan McBeth look into it. Yeah, absolutely. I think Ryan Macbeth should look into it, because I think he could prove that basically no living human could keep up with the demand of what these Twitter accounts post and have a normal life outside of that as well.
Well, just on that, sorry,
yeah,
just
yeah.
on that, Elon Musk, what was it? Someone's like the other day, he tweeted 200 things in a day. He's the CEO of 6 different companies. He's the father of now, I don't know, 432 children. He's like doing Doge, where all day he's supposed to be like slashing and burning the American political landscape. And you're like, and he's doing 200 tweets. So, and he's also the top of the gaming charts for, a couple of different computer games. And then now it's been found out that actually he did admit that someone's been playing on his behalf. Yeah, fucking, of course that happened, because you can't physically do all of those things. But if I was on the board of Tesla and SpaceX, I'd be like, why the hell are we paying this guy all this money? Because he's doing nothing. He's piddling about over there, and he's actually driving our stocks down, our shares down, our share price down, because everyone hates us, and Tesla's now dropping through the roof. I'd be like, we need to get rid of this man who is just sitting on Twitter all day. So then, does he have a team of people on that are tweeting for him? Does he have he's just like, I don't know what to believe about anything anymore. Same with Donald Trump. We know now 100% that he at least has many of his tweets written for him by other people. There was someone in the previous administration that came out and admitted that she was someone who wrote the tweets. She would then go up, he would look at the tweet, and he would say, I want that word capitalized and that word capitalized, and she would go away and do that, and then it would tweet out. And because it's like he doesn't speak that well. Like he can't write. I mean, grammatically, some of these are like perfect grammatical. Some of them aren't, but some of them are. And you're like, well, that in itself tells you something, because there's variability there. So anyway, we're just in this period where you just don't know what's going on, what's true and what's not.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, manufacture of doubt by design, I think, is what's going on here. And yeah, I think the idea that I really don't think that there is any accountability behind, or really there aren't enough people that are questioning the muzzle velocity that we're seeing from a lot of these accounts, right? So one person that I worked with in university, his name was Jonathan Corpusong. Professor Ong was an absolute major influence on my life academically. He's from the Philippines, and he studied disinformation operations from Duterte's regime in the Philippines. And we see actually a lot of the regimes in Southeast Asia were using these techniques throughout the early 2000s leading up into the 2010s. And it's these bot farms and troll farms that you find in places like Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand. There's a veritable market for it. Just other sort of internet research agencies. Yeah, that's him. He is an incredible researcher and writer as well. I recommend Poverty of Television in the Public Square is a really good one by him. And he talks about sort of trying to make equitable and truthful media environments, sustainable media environments, through the lens of like digital humanitarianism a lot of the time. And his analysis of bot networks in Southeast Asia, I think, is really essential to understand what's happening now in a lot of other countries. Is we see that this sort of internet research agency actually had a lot of other competitors throughout the world, or maybe not even competitors, but potentially got inspired by some of these political processes that we saw. So like, it might not even just be like that the Russians came up with this all on their own, or the Chinese came up with this all on their own. There's independent agency of other governments that have authoritarian styles of rule around the world that seek to control the information environment. And you can kind of scale it, right? It's a scalable kind of approach to government media. So you could see during Duterte's rise to power, this rise in right-wing populist propaganda on particularly Facebook was where we were seeing most of this happening, not so much on Twitter.
Because at the time, the algorithms on Facebook were famously favoring the right, the far right, and the right. Daily Caller, Breitbart, all these organizations really had a boon. You can, in fact, you can track their financial windfalls to the change of Facebook algorithms. I used to write for Pathos at the time, Pathos Non-Religious, and we, like, every time Facebook changed their algorithm, we'd be told, right, guys, your payment's gone down, like the amount of money you're getting for how many clicks or whatever has been really hammered. Like, our financials were completely connected to Facebook algorithm. Like, it was that clear, it was that powerful, and they famously changed it to try and drive, like, I guess, fear mongering and clicks and blah blah blah. And so the algorithms favored the far right. Then they subsequently changed them again recently because people have realized that, and there was a lot of clamor for them to change. But they've changed the algorithm such that it now just celebrates effectively polarization and extremes. So, you know, the far left and the far right. And it's like, where are these sensible voices allowed to exist somewhere in between that? And, you know, if we're having our, you know, freedom of speech, there's no such thing as freedom of speech when we are having our diet of information dictated to us by an algorithm. That is not freedom of speech. I'm not seeking out what I want to seek out. I am being shown things. Like when I go onto Twitter and Elon Musk is in my face 100% of the time, that is not free speech. That is him dictating an algorithm to me and forcing me to eat things that I don't want to eat.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, oh man, with like a better sort of healthier approach to social media, I think would be to kind of think of it as stepping into a room, right? When you engage with this app, you are stepping into a media sphere all on its own. It's a media environment all on its own, and that inherently distorts reality. Some things in there might be real, some things in there might be true, but I think anytime we approach social media, and we do as humans, right? Because we communicate visually, we learn visually. The visual imagery that we take in is like somewhere around like 70-ish% of how we kind of understand our world if we're able to, right, to see. So I think that bias that we have, that psychological bias, that biological bias, is easily manipulated through this idea of the mediated environment, right? And the more that we think of X as being a room and not the world, right? As Elon Musk likes to try and portray it, this is worldwide communication, all barriers removed, right? This is
really good analogy.
The voice of the people, right? He's putting out polls on X as though everyone voting in that poll is a legitimate voice, when we know that there are illegitimate accounts on here that could easily vote in that, right? And if that was happening in real life, right, sort of fake people voting in elections, who do you think would be throwing an absolute hissy fit, right? So this idea of like portraying X as reality, as a projection of reality of the world to the rest of the world, I think creates this tendency for us to rely on things that are easy, that are accessible. And when you're dealing with such muzzle velocity at the scale that we're dealing with it becomes almost impossible for the uneducated, or maybe not uneducated, but maybe
people who don't, underinformed, the people that don't decide to spend their entire life like we do, like on like immersed in the minutiae of geopolitics. Yeah. And that's understandably most people on Earth.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's what you have here is a creation of reality outside of reality, but that's being sold back to you as a projection of that. And it's a lie. And it's a lie. As much as I dedicate my time in my life to putting out truthful things on social media, right? Like, I think people should understand that, like, my reporting on Kherson and Ukraine is only a fragment of the reality. It's not the whole story, right? Like, there is so much that I am missing in my daily coverage of it. So to try and project social media as reality in a lot of ways, that you see happening with right-wing populist movements, whether it's just like posting screenshots of numbers and organizations and going, that's corrupt, and you don't even know what the organization is, you don't know what the money went for, you just see big number, name you don't know next to it, scream corruption, and it creates this whole other reality that is entirely divorced from fact, physical being. I don't know.
That is well, but that is the epistemic crisis that we're living in. So epistemology is a study of knowledge and truth. We are in an epistemic crisis as much as a national crisis, national security, epistemic security, national security, cyber security. And we don't know what is true, and we don't know what is false, arguably much of the time, and that is a real crisis that is at the heart of our reality, and it is just truly worrying the times we're living in. Well, look, as we sort of meander to the end, because, mate, I mean, I have a feeling that we could just talk for the next 3 hours, and people have got places to go, people to see. But I just want to throw out a couple of things that as you were speaking, luckily I am able to listen to you and react to you, and also look at some stuff that's just popping up as well. And you know, scary times we live in. Let's have some more scary times, Brendan. So what's happening while we've been online? So the US has tried to blackmail Ukraine in Munich, sign a mineral deal or no meeting with VP Vance. So this is what we're now hearing, details about the mineral deal, about the 50% of Ukrainian resources, per European Pravda. When Kiev sought a compromise, the US rejected all key changes. Zelensky refused to sign under pressure. Suddenly the hardline stance disappeared and talks with Vance went ahead. That's interesting. Stand up, say, no, we're not going to do that. And actually they back down. So that's interesting. But the demands on Zelensky were pretty incredible. And now we're hearing it wasn't 4 hours that he had, but 1 hour. Zelensky was given just 1 hour to sign a mineral deal in exchange for continued US support. US Treasury Secretary Bessent set the deadline. Zelensky responded, we are not a raw materials country. It's about investment, not just taking our resources. Good on you, Zelensky. But this is so depressing that they're now having to stand up to the US imperialism. This is like Russian imperialism on this side and US imperialism on that side. It is absolutely incredible. Russia remains the greatest threat to Europe, says the Lithuanian defense minister. Putin won't change. We have 3 to 4 years to fully prepare for a major war in Europe. NATO must be 100% ready to fight at any moment. The only way to avoid war is to be fully prepared for it. Now, that is the precursor to the next two things. So Financial Times has now reported that Putin wants NATO troops. So it's like Lithuanians saying NATO needs to be prepared to go to war with Russia. Russia are on the advance. Putin wants NATO troops removed from the whole of the former Soviet empire. European officials believe Trump is likely to agree to withdraw US troops from the Baltics and perhaps further west, leaving the EU vulnerable to the Russian army that NATO governments warn is preparing for a larger conflict beyond Ukraine. A quote from Christopher Miller in the Financial Times. I presume he wrote this, or one of his colleagues. European officials believe Trump is likely to withdraw troops. So that was the quote that we just heard. So in other words, like on the one hand, European officials are saying we need NATO to be prepared, and on the other hand, it's looking like NATO is going to withdraw as US agrees unilaterally or bilaterally with Russia over the fate of NATO in Europe. It's absolutely insane. And then just to add another thing to kick you in the balls, Russia is close to a deal with Syria for post-Assad military presence, Bloomberg reports. So after Russia gets to bomb the shit out of Syria, the Syrians are now agreeing potentially to allow Russia to remain in Syria. In exchange for maintaining its military facilities, Moscow may assist Damascus in countering the Islamic State group, which remains active in eastern Syria. And this is where US aid, this is where the US, this is where the EU, this is where the UK needs to be in Syria, sorting stuff out. so that that doesn't happen. And now Russia have gone from bombing the crap out these people to agreeing with a deal with these people to maintain in Syria. So goodness me, like what a difference a couple of months makes, and what a difference a US administration makes when you're seeing the possible recession of NATO from Eastern Europe, and Eastern Europe probably going, hang on, what? It's just if Putin gets what he wants, then we know whose side Donald Trump is on. And end of rant.
Yeah, I think if people want to know whose side Donald Trump is on, and I think you mentioned this in an update earlier, his ties with Moscow going back to the 1980s, right?
Amazing, absolutely amazing.
I would point your viewers to Zarina Zabrisky's Medium page. She's got an article that she wrote in 2018, all about Trump's early contacts with Russia. And it's quite lengthy. It's like a 40-minute read. So it is a deep dive. Very thorough.
Wow.
Very well researched. I highly recommend it. Yeah, Trump's early contacts with Russia by Zarina Zabriskie.
Yeah, and the precursor, I mean, just to whet your appetite, The Hill in April 2024 wrote, there was an article in The Hill talking about how Donald Trump in 1987 changed his opinion on NATO completely, as in he didn't have an opinion, and then he took out a 130,000 big page set of adverts attacking NATO. Why as a US businessman would you buy adverts to slag off NATO? And he did that just after visiting Moscow. Like that is empirically what happened. We know that's not like lefties having a go at Trump. We know 100% that Trump paid for adverts. Those adverts exist. We know they're there. He paid a lot of money for adverts to slag off in public NATO. Why would you slag off NATO in public? Like, why would you pay $130,000 to do that? And then he did that just after visiting Moscow. Let's join the dots here. Let's at least say that it's plausible that Trump is somewhat compromised. And then when you start understanding that he's wanting to pull NATO out of Eastern Europe and wanting to do things exactly that Putin would want, then you're going back to that and wondering, what the hell does Moscow have on him? And I had people on my threads the other day saying, oh, the old he's a Russian agent thing again, the old kind of Russian collusion, blah, same old Democrat talking point. No, I'm not putting up with that. You explain to me the data, right, and then come back to me. Because if you're going to dismiss this, I will dismiss you. It's Hitchens' razor. That which is established without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. So you can frick off, mate. So if you want to come back to me, bring some receipts. If you don't bring receipts, I don't want to know your opinion. So as far as I am concerned, Trump is compromised by Russia unless you show me evidence that it overcomes that threshold that's being presented there. And as you say, with Zabrisky's Medium page, which I haven't read, 40-minute read, but I presume it's like that and some.
Oh yeah, it's incredible. It's incredible. I'll send you the link to it afterwards.
Please do.
I think we need to be very honest with ourselves in that, this is who he is. This is reality. It's not a Democrat talking point. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a registered Democrat or a registered Republican. I personally don't believe in political parties. So for your US audience, maybe that might be a point of connection between us. Like, I'm not a Democrat, but I believe this with all of my heart because it is true. Right? And for me, it's about country over party in all cases, right? I take that to absolute heart. This is the reality in which we are living. This man was trying to break apart NATO before the Soviet Union collapsed. I think for many Americans, that alone, right? The Soviet Union was still in opposition to us. We were still in the Cold War. My father was deployed to Germany, and his job was to be rolled over by Russian tanks so that the rest of NATO could catch up and counterattack during this time in which Trump was doing this about disbanding NATO, right? So it's about harming American lives ultimately about harming European lives ultimately. So if you think of yourself as a true American, you need to understand that this is an effort to subvert, or not even to subvert, but to infiltrate and destroy the country without firing a shot necessarily at us.
Absolutely. And thanks to Benny Pie that has provided us with that link already. You're not needed, Brendan. The internet has just beaten you already. That's
the
a
NAPO dogs.
Yeah, that's a 37. That's my new NAFO avatar, so I'm pretty stoked with that. It's a Peaky Blinder one, and I haven't got my sideys at the moment. I've just gone full beard because I'm too lazy. I'm not lazy. I'm just too busy talking about the war in Ukraine. But
working your ass off.
Yeah, Zarina Zabriskie there with a 37-minute read, and that's me done for the next week. I'll be poring over that because, like, honestly, I can't believe that the head of the free world, so to speak, is someone that is potentially compromised, and is certainly, if he's not compromised, he's doing things weirdly that align with Putin's objectives, and it's just insanely scary. I mean, surely, I don't know. It depresses me and angers me because, we have in psychology, there's something called the just world theory. So just world theory is that we all inherently believe that the world is just, that the universe is just. This underwrites religious thought as well. So I'm not a religious person, I'm an atheist philosopher, right? But one of the reasons heaven exists as an idea is because in the intertestamental period, you had under the Seleucid Empire, you had, certainly in Judeo-Christianity I'm talking about, you had people who were Jews that were being oppressed by Hellenized Jews being Greekized Jews. And they were like, hang on, we're the promised people. We're the chosen people of God. Why do bad things happen to good people? And they couldn't understand that because there's no notion of heaven. So all things had to be done on earth. And well, that pretty much sucks because hang on, we're being oppressed and I'm dying. So then they looked to the Hellenized Jews who were oppressing them, who had an idea. Well, the Greeks had an idea of heaven and hell, Tartarus and the Elysian Fields and etc. etc. So they're like, okay, that's a pretty good idea. So they took on the idea of heaven and hell, and then had to invent a vehicle through which you could deliver that, which was the soul. Okay, so, and we can pick apart all of these ideas, but this is the evolution of how heaven and hell came to be in Judeo-Christianity. So then it started getting written into kind of theology, and then it kind of developed over the New Testament period, etc., etc. But the point is, it was answering the problem of why do bad things happen to good people? And this is just a human condition issue, which is we have an inherent belief that the universe is just. So one way of answering that, well, I feel the universe is just, but I'm seeing that it's not just, is to invent heaven and hell, because then it gets recalibrated after you die. It's like, well, it sucks. Why has my baby got cancer and died? It's okay. Your baby goes to heaven. Oh, that's all right then. That's all been balanced out perfectly well. Why have I just been murdered? And why have I just been tortured and murdered? Oh, it's all right. You're going to go to heaven. Oh, that's all right then. Jobs are good. So like, that sorts out all your sense that the world is not just. I don't believe in that. I don't believe in heaven and hell, right? So I look at the universe and go, Jesus, it sucks. Jesus, holy cow, it sucks, right? Just, shit happens, but it happens an awful lot. And there are black holes and there's cancer and, there are horrible things, but, I try and live a good life and try and do good things and make the world a better place for what it's worth. And we can question, what is that worth? And these are all big philosophical discussions, and I've written books on that, etc., whatever. But we have this sense that the universe is a just place. And so I get really and this is kind of what underwrites why I have this YouTube channel, which is the war started, and I got desperately pissed off that the war started, because it's really unfair when a bully attacks someone that is smaller and less powerful than them and appears to start winning. And like, we need to do something. So like, I believe that human problems need to be solved by humans, right? And so we can't just go, well, it's all right, it'll sort itself out in heaven and hell. That's in my books, that is not, literally in my books, that's not good enough, right? So we need to sort this out ourselves. So like, when I then see that the most powerful man in the world is employed an oligarch, or not even employed him, just has his oligarch mate going around slashing and burning, destroying the US government, and then turning the US framework against Ukraine, the people that desperately need help, that are fighting for democracy, freedom, and goodness, then I get desperately pissed off again. Like all over again. I was pissed off 3 years ago when Russia were doing this to Ukraine, and now I'm getting equally incandescent with rage and frustration that the US appears to be starting to do that as well. And I just hope that Europe is that bastion, or and when I say Europe, I mean Europe and Canada and Australia and Japan and New Zealand and all of these places. Europe is a bit of a shortcut, and it includes UK and Norway and Switzerland and EU and all of these entities that have been supporting Ukraine. We really need to make sure that we come together, because this is the future of the world. This is if we want a just world to exist, then we'd have to fight bloody hard for a just world. Just worlds don't just appear. Like, world is an unfair place because humans are quite often dicks, right? And we just go around doing dickish stuff. And as a result, like, the good ones amongst us have to go, hang on, mate, don't do that. That makes you a dick, and we're going to sort you out, and we're going to try and make the world a better place. The question is, are there enough of us in positions of power and positions of being enfranchised enough to be able to affect a change on the world so that the world becomes a better place? Or do we just let it all burn down and sit back and do nothing about it? And for what it's worth, you and I are doing our little things in corners of the internet that recognize this. Sorry to speak for you here, but I get it. I guess we recognize this together, and this is what we try and do to make hopefully the world a little better than it was if we weren't around.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. That is, I mean, that underwrites my entire philosophical approach to this kind of work. I mean, if I wasn't paying attention to the human safari in Kherson, if I wasn't paying attention to Russian foreign influence in my country, then I wouldn't know anyone personally that's doing it. I'm the only person that I know in my bubble of people that is dedicated to this and this issue, right? And that would just be another sort of injustice being unaddressed within the world. And I saw through Winter on Fire on Netflix.
Amazing. Beautiful.
How
it makes me cry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I took that to absolute heart, and I am a firm believer that, and I don't know if I want to use these words because maybe, I don't know, they're a little charged, but I think we need our own Maidan here in the United States at this point. It's getting to a point, I think, like, if we get past the midterm elections and there isn't a legislative or judicial balancing here, then I think we are going to need some serious changes in the United States, and I'm not sure how we get those, as the system to make those changes is manipulated,
self-compromised,
destroyed as time goes on. Like, it's going to continue to deteriorate.
Yeah, because, like, some people are calling this a win, that loads of people in the DOJ are now are resigning. So you've got some en masse resigning of judges who have been asked to do some egregious things. So Trump said, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to arrest this person or do whatever. And these judges are going, no, I can't do that. That is illegal, and it is amoral. And so you're having loads of judges resign. But the problem is, yeah, that's great. Well done for standing up for your rights. And that's really important. But then you will get replaced by someone who will do that, which means that then the judicial system is being stacked against the checks and balance, against upholding those checks and balances. And it is becoming a compromise. I mean, the Supreme Court is pretty compromised, but actually I think they might end up going against Trump. I think there's a realization someone like Amy Coney Barrett as a Supreme Court justice is weirdly going against Trump, which is a good thing on some of the decisions that are being made. So Supreme Court isn't necessarily like fully compromised, but that was a start. Judges, prosecutors, all sorts of people. Sorry, and so you've got some real issues. Oops, sorry. Pressing all sorts of things. You've got issues. So you're right. If that compromise continues and the checks and balances are no longer able to be brought to bear against an administration that is breaking the law, then other things have to be done. Is what you're saying, and yeah.
It might be high time that the American people, as we're talking about this on President's Day, it might be high time for the American people to actually make their voices heard and not to have a right-wing populist with a network of bots speak for them.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. So look, goodness me, we have been just shooting a breeze, chewing a cud. We haven't talked about, like,
we didn't talk about Ukraine.
What you were booked on to talk about. Mate, it just means we're going to have to hang out again, which is always a pleasure and certainly never a chore. I just have some thanks to do, and possibly a question from Mitch Mazzarell, my Canadian legend. Super sticker from Johnny Christensen. Thank you, my good man. Julian Rossiter, living in New Jersey, I propose renaming the Delaware Bay to the New Jersey Bay. You do that. Apparently you can just rename whatever you like. I've renamed Britain Jonathan M.S. Pierce Land, and I'm going to see if it catches on. I don't have the power of a president, but I reckon I've already... So people call... You probably... If you've watched enough of my stuff... Brendan, you'll know this, but I am legend of the multiverse, and the reason I am, as many will know, and some people who are new to the channel will be like, why do people call you legend all the time? I'm not a legend, really, but Ramzan Kadyrov, the Chechen warlord, decided to give himself a couple of years ago Hero of Chechnya award. He started out, I'm going to start this new award, Hero of Chechnya, and the first person to receive this award is me. Thank you very much. I'm Hero of Chechnya. To which I said, well, anyone could do that. I'm Legend of the Universe. Anyway, because there are other legends of the universe as well, like JR, who helps with the mapping, Grimsoft with Discord, and Benny Pie that helped with my YouTubing. Like, I'm now Legend of the Multiverse, and they can just be like maybe small universe down there, small verse down there. But anyway, like the year later, Ramzan Kadyrov gave the award the next year. It's like, well, I can't give it to myself again, really. I mean, I probably can, but I bet I'm better give it to someone else. It's like, he looks around, he goes, oh, Adam, he gets his son over. It's like, oh, mate, do you want Hero of Chechnya? And he just gives it to his son. And you're like, well, there you go. So, it turns out anyone can do things to themselves if you're in positions of power. But there you go. Sorry, I digress, my good man. Mitch, thank you, dude. Given DJT's no, we've had that one. It's another one. Mitch here again. Thanks, Mitch. Look on the bright side. Only 1,434 days remaining until DJT is out of office. Really? Though, really? Is it 24th Amendment or no? Not 24th. What is it? 5th Amendment?
I don't trust any timelines. I don't trust any timelines or dates or numbers that Donald Trump says. Let's just say this, right? He said JD Vance is not his successor. So
yeah, that was amazing. I think stabbed him in the back.
Yeah, you can kind of take that however you want.
Yeah, but actually Mitch says, well, what could possibly go wrong in the meantime? Honestly, a lot, but we will have to weather this storm regardless. Yes, Mitch, and I'll tell you what, if you want to weather this storm, just huddle down with me, guys. Huddle down in the bunker of ATP Geopolitics, and we will weather this storm together, and we'll hatch up some plans to make the world a better place, and maybe we'll succeed, but maybe we'll die trying. I don't advise dying, but we'll try not to. But it just sounded the right thing to say. This is where I get to the point where I think I'm going a little bit mad, Brendan. Johnny Nevregard, hello, anti-Rumpkins. Glory to Ukraine. Absolutely, my good man. Thank you to all the people in the super chats who have been lively in their chatting in a live chat, lively in their chatting. I forgot to say James from Why in Ukraine, who I met out in Ukraine as well recently. And in fact, the flag that's just fallen down, the reason your flag's not up, James, is because sellotape doesn't last forever. And it's there. It's just on the door handle. So I'll put it back up later, James. Sorry. There's a worse thing that could happen under a ceasefire than anyone is considering. Trump could switch off Starlink. I do worry. I worry about the economy, the sanctions, being lifted, and I worry about Starlink being lifted, so or switched off. So yes, you're absolutely right. There are many levers that are able to be pulled, and I think that the US holds a lot of very important cards that if it stops going their way, then they could pull on those levers and it won't end well for Ukraine. So it's a really difficult path, as I've said, to navigate for both Zelensky and Europe. But at the moment, things are looking very much like they're going to go further towards Putin and Russia than they are towards Ukraine. It does depend on today, though. The meeting in Paris today, that's happening as we speak. Right now, I saw the Starmer's just got there, or like an hour ago. So hopefully, fingers crossed, things will happen that are beneficial for Ukraine. So Brendan, thank you, CZ, excellent show. Thank you. Brendan, any last words and thoughts on anything in the world?
I'll just say, with all the Ukrainians that I've talked to about this, I kind of look to their example, because I don't really see that example within my own political context. So I just look to the Ukrainians' example as to how they stand for democracy, how they fight for democracy, and a free democratic world. And in terms of Kherson, I'm going to keep my eyes on that. I'm not going to stop as long as this war is going on. I'm going to keep investigating Kherson. There's other aspects beyond the human safari that I'd like to take a look at too, in terms of like war crimes occurring in occupied territory. And I'm working on trying to get a larger pool of data going back even further than I've looked for the future. So some stuff to maybe look out for. That might be a Tochny article. That might be
Thanks,
in
Sarah.
the works in the next couple weeks. So
good timing. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. It's just a cup of tea was delivered, and there's nothing more that brings a smile to my face than a nice cup of tea being delivered. So carry on, Brendan.
No, I would say if people want to keep an eye on the Kherson region, if they want to understand a little more of what's going on there in regards to the human safari, they can check MySpace on Substack. It's free subscription. I don't make any money off of it. I do everything I do for free. If you want to donate, you can pledge to my Substack, but I don't require it. I think this all needs to be out there for basically for free, so that people can actually understand what's going on here. And I'll say stay tuned every Saturday, because I do every Saturday or Sunday, depending on how long it takes me to write the article. I do a Kherson Weekly every week. And check me out on X, because I'll do a thread on that usually the day after. And keep up with Andrew's map too, because I'm always like maybe a day behind on the shelling on that. So you can always check the day before when you wake up. You can go to Andrew's map and see that.
Yeah, as Fuzzy says, is this Fuzzy from in Ukraine? I wonder. I'm hopefully going to be doing something with Fuzzy at some point. A friend of mine who is a journo, he went to Kherson. He said it was so weary and a very strange atmosphere due to the invasion compared to other parts of Ukraine. I was there in February 2024, and then it was very much like that. Since then, I think it's just become outright dangerous and the Wild West, and Russia have succeeded in basically removing life from Kherson in any kind of meaningful way. So, well, look, if people can help out Brendan, please go to his Substack. I think it's linked below. While Brendan was talking earlier, I changed the thumbnail to this video and the title to this video, because we've talked about nothing that was advertised. I don't want any false advertising to people. So I've changed that already. This has been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate you, Brendan, and the work that you do. It's absolutely fabulous. I love a bit of data, but I don't always have time to go through what everyone does. And so actually what would be lovely is if we we do within the week. If you are up for this, and thanks, Darren, for your always continued support, mate. If you're up for this, let's have another chat and get on to the long weeds of the horrors that take place in Kherson and the other data that you were also hinting at as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to talk about Kherson at another point. I'm free this week, and I'm totally able to set something up later this week if you want, for sure.
Awesome. Well, look, stay on the line, and we'll say our goodbyes. And in the meantime, everyone else, awesome support from you guys. You are amazing. I'm so honored to have you as part of the team here. As One Ukraine says, I've hunted and been hunted by drones in Kherson. So there's a personal connection there to what has taken place in Kherson and what continues to do so. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care of yourselves. Please support Brendan. Please follow him in all the right places. Not in real life like a stalker. Don't do that. But all the right places. Please follow him as much as possible. And keep an eye on my channel for what's going on in the next week, 2 weeks, 2 months, year in this war, because I will be relentlessly following this for the benefit, hopefully, of you guys. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.